Hello and welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Compliance Week and Hyperproof. I'm Allie McDevitt with Compliance Week, and I'll be your host. Today's webcast is how Motorola is transforming their evidence collection for data protection compliance. Before we hear from our presenters, let me review the agenda. We are scheduled to go for 1 hour. After the presentation, we will have a question and answer session. Your questions will be kept confidential and anonymous, so please don't be shy. You can ask your questions at any time using the Ask a Question function on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'll post them to our guests at the end of their presentation. After the Q&A, I will wrap up the webcast. This webcast will also offer CPE credit for all attendees. Please be sure you are using either Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser and you have disabled your pop-up blockers in order to ensure access to the exam. Once I have signed off and the webcast is completely over, the final examination will be presented automatically in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send an email to webcast@complianceweek.com. Once again, to ensure receipt of your CPE credit, please be sure you're using Google Chrome or Firefox as your internet browser. If you've missed anything, I'll repeat these instructions at the end of the webcast, so stay tuned. A few other administrative details. At any time during the presentation, listeners can download the slides from the drop-down menu on the left-hand side of your screen. There you will also find the feedback form for the webcast. We welcome your thoughts, as we are always looking to improve your experience. If you wish to increase the slide size, you can also hit the View Slide Full Screen button at the top right of your screen. And lastly, a Help button is located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen for assistance. I would like to welcome today's speakers. It's my pleasure to introduce Aidan Collins, Head of Enterprise Business at Hyperproof, the leading provider of compliance operations software solutions. In this role, Aidan works with organizations to operationalize the complex requirements of a range of compliance frameworks, including those from NIST and ISO. We also have Paula Pileggi, who serves as the Senior Director, Global Data Protection Office Products. In her role, she leads the development and management of the Data Privacy Compliance Program with respect to Motorola Solutions products and services. With over 20 years of legal and compliance experience in the public safety market, Paula is passionate about ensuring our mission-critical products and services embody privacy by design and support our customers' compliance needs. We also have with us today Rebecca Strive-Monty, who serves as the Director, Global Data Protection Compliance Products within Paula's department. In her role, Rebecca guides and supports the ISO 27001 and SOC 2 initiatives around products and services at MSI. With over 30 years of technical and compliance experience across the public sector, Rebecca is dedicated to helping MSI demonstrate its commitment to privacy and data protection while enabling the tools needed for people to be their best in the moments that matter. It's great to have you all with us, Aidan, Paula, and Rebecca. And with that, I will turn it over to Aidan to get us started.
Thanks, Allie, and hello, everybody. On behalf of Hyperproof, I want to welcome you to our webinar today, and thank you for taking the time to be with us. As an introduction, we want to spend a minute just getting you acclimatized to Motorola and Motorola Solutions, Inc. So we're going to play a brief video to let you see who they are.
What if safety, efficiency, and productivity were deeply connected? That the technologies that make us safer could also make us better at everything we do. Smarter and faster, more focused and aware, more connected and resilient, more accurate and fair. It's a reinvention of what safety can achieve, from everyday operations to your overall mission. We've made it real by building the first technology ecosystem that unifies voice, video, data, and analytics on a single platform. technologies that communicate with each other and learn from each other, information that flows freely from cameras to radios, from smart devices to command centers, intelligence that advances outwards, giving you eyes and ears where you've never had them before, addressing the industry challenges of today with an eye toward the future. It's time to know more of what's happening, to put people where they're needed most, to get ahead of events before they unfold, to start evolving without limits, disruption, or downtime. It's time to reimagine what safety can do.
Paula, I think that gave us a good introduction to Motorola, and I think gave us a good sense of the important work that you do and the important work that you enable your customers to do. Can you talk a little bit about the role of compliance within Motorola and how it supports the business?
Sure, thanks, Aidan. Well, let's see, at the highest level, our general approach to data protection compliance is we've kind of split the discipline into two pieces. So we have a team that addresses what we like to refer to as the enterprise side of the house. So a data protection team who looks at things like our HR related data, assists our IT groups, et cetera. So everything internal focus. And then we have the team that I lead, which we focus on the compliance of our products and services and supporting the compliance of our customers. So at the highest level, that's kind of how we're broken in two. And then, you know, I think the way the team I lead operates, we align ourselves to address essentially our key driver. So I think it makes some sense, Aidan, if I were to discuss a little bit about what that key driver is, where it comes from, and the workflows associated. Thoughts?
That would be very helpful, I think. I think there'd be a lot of interest in that.
Sure. Okay. So what is the number one driver behind the group that I am leading and the company's approach to the data protection in our products and services? That primary driver really is the need to, quote unquote, demonstrate compliance, satisfy that accountability privacy principle, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But that need to demonstrate compliance, not only is it legally required, but it also is increasingly demanded by our customers. And in fact, we find it can even rise to the level of being gating to a sale. In other words, if we can't demonstrate our compliance, we can't make a sale. So understanding a little bit about, for those of you who are not as familiar with the privacy principle of accountability, where this comes from primarily is from what we call kind of comprehensive privacy legislation and things such as GDPR. That comprehensive privacy legislation is now saying to our customers, who generally are the controller of data, that you may only use processors or a processor if that processor of your data can demonstrate their compliance to this regulation. So we see that across the world in a lot of different comprehensive privacy legislation. And what that is driving then is our customers conducting a lot of due diligence on us. And that due diligence we find is coming at us in three different ways. I wouldn't be surprised if you guys are seeing the same. So number one, they're asking us to prove it. They don't necessarily trust us. They prove it, show that a third party has evaluated your information security and data privacy practices. So they're asking us for things like an ISO 27001 certification, an ISO 27701, which is the privacy certification. They're asking us for SOC 2 reports. second, they're sending us information security questionnaires that can range in scope from just a few questions to, a laundry list, 300 or more. And then third, they're also asking us to make contractual commitments to our compliance with different frameworks. We find that those different workflows are driving tremendous amount of evidence collection. And led us to you, Aiden.
That's great, Paula. I appreciate that. And so the question that comes to mind when I hear you talk about that multitude of frameworks is, how do you think about any way to manage efficiently across those frameworks? And you and I and Rebecca have talked before about some of the keys to managing those frameworks efficiently. Can you talk a little bit about what you use to build across the multiple frameworks that you have to worry about?
Sure. So, we've been approaching this, one way. Now through Hyperproof, we're looking to approach it in another. But as you can see from the video that you just showed, we are in a lot of different types of markets that drive the need to comply with a lot of different frameworks. And as more and more comprehensive legislation comes out, the demand for making compliance representations and demonstrating compliance has increased. And so how we've been doing it, essentially an assessment after an assessment after an assessment after an assessment, creating tremendous assessment fatigue amongst our products and services groups, that really is driving the need for an army of individuals. Well, I don't know about the rest of the folks on the call, but, a lot of times business folks aren't that excited about increasing their compliance and legal budgets. So, we have been pushed to work smarter. And so we need to find a way where we can conduct one assessment and utilize the results of that assessment, the evidence from that assessment, to satisfy many, many different frameworks. So that's the approach we're taking now.
Good. And Rebecca, you're kind of at the front end of managing a lot of these programs. Anything you would add to how Paula's comment on it there?
I think that she's covered a very important point. We come to our technical teams and we ask them lots and lots of questions. Many of them are the same questions or very similar questions across frameworks. And so rather than coming to them and saying, this week we are working on SOC 2, and we're going to ask you questions about how you manage access control. And then a month later, we come back to you and we say, we're doing ISO 27001, and we're going to ask you another question that looks hauntingly similar about how you handle access control. If we can manage our evidence properly so that we are asking one question of them so that they can tell us what they do and have that satisfy across frameworks, there are ways to apply that. We've really reduced the burden on our teams. We've reduced the fatigue that Paula talks about, which is a thing where you get people that say, this isn't my day job. When in reality, of course, compliance is part of their day job, but when we've asked them the same question 3 different ways over the course of a month and they've had to stop things they were doing to essentially give us the same answer, we've worn out our welcome a little bit and we're not being efficient. So efficient ways of managing these frameworks and managing the evidence that we need for them is just critical for us.
Great. And I think we are going to get into talking a lot more about the processes for evidence management, both what you've done and what you will do. But just as maybe to bring closer to that first point about multiple frameworks, one of the key views that we think is important for organizations is that they have the ability to look across those multiple frameworks. And Hyperproof, as the tooling that supports that from Motorola and others, really allows organizations to be able to see what's the work that's happening across multiple frameworks, multiple audits, multiple programs. And so that's a key piece to be able to pick up and look across those multiple frameworks that you're working against. So let's switch tack and talk a little bit about evidence management then. really the heavy lift that's involved around that. And Paula, do you want to say a little bit about how up until now you've thought about evidence management? What are the key pieces of that? And then we'll transition to how you're thinking about it now.
Sure. So it's a tough subject. So historically, you know, the way our teams have started out and what we've done is, you know, evidence is basically managed in a spreadsheet. And that's no way to manage, candidly. And again, as I stated, the demand for compliance representations is escalating. And so, as Rebecca mentions, we have to get more efficient in the way we manage that evidence. So while you can have a laundry list of controls in a spreadsheet and you can have your link to the particular evidence, that link, having to go back to each and every spreadsheet is just not functional for us, nor can I imagine it really is for too many organizations as time goes on. So we are excited about having a solution where we can take that evidence, label it with how it applies to a particular control, and be able to search on that. So from an evidence management perspective, that labeling of evidence to controls or requirements is key for us, so that can help drive getting us to that point where we only have to ask a question once, and then being able to map that evidence to other control frameworks.
And Rebecca, once again, you're kind of at the coalface here around doing that work. As you think about transitioning to using HyperProof, one of the features you and I have talked about is the ability to group evidence together and be able to reuse it. How important is that to you as you work through these frameworks?
It's critically important. We have a number of frameworks and a number of groups within our company that we go to ask for information. And so if we can reuse information that we have gathered once across these multiple frameworks, we've saved time, we've managed to make things more efficient. One of the other things that we can do is sometimes the evidence is not exactly cookie cutter from group to group, but if we can take evidence and show one group how another group has answered it, so that we can say, is this what you do? Is this policy, this process, this procedure what you do? And if it is not, how do you differ in this? Then we're not asking teams to start from ground zero. We're able to use evidence that we've already collected, either reuse it from whole cloth, or to ask them to update and differentiate so that they understand what the answer should be. Because people that do a lot of work across frameworks know that a lot of what you're doing is education with a group. So you're going to a product group and you're saying to them, you know, what do you do? And you ask them a question and they may not initially understand what the content of that question is. And having this current evidence is absolutely critical in helping them to understand how to answer these questions and what information we're actually looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think, and Paul alluded to it at the beginning as well, the sense of audit fatigue, the sense where traditionally you've got to ask the same person oftentimes for very similar evidence over time for different compliance purposes. So the ability to be able to ask once, use many times, I think something that we've certainly thought about in HyperProof as a key part of the evidence that, or rather the value proposition around evidence management.
One of the other things I wanted to say that's really important is having a tool where, say, for instance, we have gathered evidence about a particular subject, and then we've taken it to another group, and their evidence is similar but slightly different. Being able to categorize that evidence across groups with the differences is really important. So again, we're not starting from ground zero and we're applying what we've learned, but making sure that the evidence we collect is really accurate for each group. And this tool does allow us to do that. There's a feature called Teams, and I may be jumping ahead here, but within that, we're able to both share evidence and tailor evidence. And in evidence management, that is such an important thing to be able to do.
And if I could make a comment, Aiden, the other thing, you know, as I sit here thinking about one of the other big benefits of the evidence management, not only, you know, is our goal to help eliminate assessment fatigue. I suppose we speak about that first because that's such a something we hear about almost on a daily basis. But from the lawyer's perspective, so for those lawyers in the group, here's what I absolutely love. Because we are able to tag or label the evidence as satisfying a particular type of control, being able to utilize and map that evidence to other frameworks is absolutely key for minimizing our legal risk. So, and here's what I mean, and the lawyers I know will appreciate this. If you make a representation that we're HIPAA compliant, yet you really haven't done a full-blown due diligence analysis of whether in fact you are HIPAA compliant, and let's say you wind up not meeting those and you get sued for it, if you have no due diligence behind the representation you made, you are potentially looking at regulatory fines and penalties, punitive damages, you know, all the uglies that we try to avoid in lawsuits. If you have due diligence behind that representation, then, okay, if you have a violation, maybe you're just going to fall into the merely negligent category, or, you know, you'll be able to minimize the type of damages that you're looking at and possibly take yourself out of that horrible category where you may not even have insurance coverage, but merely negligent, you will have insurance coverage. With some of the features in this tool where you can take evidence that's already been labeled as satisfying control and then map that to another framework, you can, if you have your teams come up to you and say, oh, I know we've been selling in the EU, but now we're selling in New Zealand, and you want to look at New Zealand's law, you can get a quick read on how much due diligence you really would have to meet the needs of that new statute that you might be dealing with in New Zealand. So purely from the legal risk perspective, this tool helps you to put that due diligence in place much more quickly than you otherwise would. That's something we've really been struggling on the legal side. So there you have it.
And Paula, we hear from our customers oftentimes that the ability to demonstrate good practice, the ability to take advantage or at least be eligible for safe harbor requirements when that's possible, that's really a critical piece of doing this work. It's what our teachers used to tell us in school, right? You do the work, but you got to show your work. And so one of the impetuses for us building HyperProof was to enable organizations to show their work to internal and external stakeholders, customers, regulators. One of the things you've talked about, Paula, in some of our conversations is how this then supports the product motions that organizations go through. And so as you think about it in your role supporting the products business at Motorola, how does doing this work more efficiently impact them?
Oh, well, I mean, the number one thing is our product organizations, as we've stated, they're feeling that assessment fatigue. So anything we can do to eliminate that and streamline that, and to make quick decisions. Again, you know, so I worry certainly about the legal risk if we're launching into a new country, and, you know, what do those laws mean to us? But it's great for the product teams. You know, they will have a better ability based on the evidence we've gathered to date to understand, okay, is it a heavy lift from a product perspective to launch into a new country? What are the controls that I don't have evidence collected on? Are those controls ones that I can satisfy? Am I going to have to go back to the drawing board and re-architect my product to build in XYZ requirement? So this ultimately is something that can be used as a forecasting tool to determine whether or not you're looking at a heavy lift in a new country or not, or a new market, you know, or if you could see from our products, we go into a lot of different markets. So that is likewise an issue. So it's very helpful to the product teams, not only just minimizing their assessment fatigue, but also can give them a view to future product launches.
And if I could jump in, there's one added thing that product teams generally don't think about when someone comes to them and says they're going to do an audit. And that is that by managing this evidence properly, we are helping to integrate across groups within the company. So one group is able to see the evidence and say, oh, how does that other product team do this? Is there a better way for us to do this? So we're both helping, we're helping with policy, we're helping with process, and by managing this properly, we're helping with integration and consistency across the company.
And that's, again, and you've talked about that, Rebecca, as well, that the ability, and you said it earlier, right, the ability to get a head start from one group to the next, to be able to show one group, this is the type of evidence that we want to collect, how much of this do you already have, or can you get something that's very similar to it to meet the requirement? And so one of the things we like to think about is really enabling not only the collaboration that you've talked about, but upping the ability to be more efficient. So not only avoiding audit and assessment fatigue, but ensuring that we're able to execute what's an ever-increasing burden around compliance, executing that more efficiently and more effectively over time. So let me switch and maybe drop down one level. We've talked a lot about evidence and the importance of collection and reuse. Rebecca, do you want to talk a little bit about what type of evidence you're typically seeing and how that manifests across the organization?
So most frameworks have a great deal in common with regard to data protection and information security. You're always going to have questions about access control. You're always going to have questions about whether or not your general policies and procedures across your corporate structure exist. You're always going to have questions that have to do with change management, because that's critically important no matter what you're doing. And so for these kinds of things, it's really important to be able to craft a question and collect evidence in such a way that you have a consistent answer, both across groups and across frameworks. For instance, if you had a SOC 2 and you have answered questions about access control, and then you presented very different evidence for your ISO 27001 for access control, perhaps you have given that report and that certificate to the same customer, and the question is going to be, why are these answers different? And they might be different because you asked different people. You're going to get a different perspective on anything, depending on who you ask. 10 different people, 8 different answers. So this is going to help with consistency across our requirements and controls. It's going to help with integration across the company, because there are all of these aspects of our business that are in common across products, across business units.
And pardon the interruption, did we lose you, Aidan?
I apologize. I was on mute. My apologies for that. One of the questions that we oftentimes run into is what are the different kinds of evidences that are collected, and then which ones are easier to collect, which ones are more challenging. Rebecca, as you've done working around these programs in the past, and now you're working with them on HyperProof, are you seeing any difference in how easy or challenging it is to collect evidence?
Having a tool that adequately categorizes evidence makes it so much easier to do. When we start to ask about the various aspects of access control, that's a big chunk. If we can look at evidence across groups and see what they have answered, that gives us a big leg up. When we look at something that's difficult, like change management, which may be different across groups depending on what kind of development strategies they're using. If they're using waterfall, their change management is going to be very different than if they're an agile shop. being able to collect that evidence and to categorize it and keep it fresh, critically important. Things like business continuity plans and incident response plans and policies, and even privacy policies, which may change depending on what market you're in. Being able to keep these fresh, keep these current, make sure we understand where the answers came from is very, very helpful in streamlining the way we approach these questions.
One of the areas that we think about at Hyperproof is how do we bring more automation to bear on this problem? How do we think about automating the collection of evidence and proof? And so one of the areas that we're working on is to identify what are those most common areas of typically technical evidence and proof that exists in our environments. Oftentimes it's around configuration files or access control lists, et cetera, and automating those. Rebecca, as you think about the workflow that's involved in collecting evidence, my sense is that a lot of that today is manual, right? It's a request to somebody. It's a request to somebody to say, please provide me with X. Will automation be an important part of that as you go forward?
It will be a breath of fresh air. It would be a wonderful thing to have a tool that could kick off a workflow that says, we need this month's change tickets, or kick off a workflow that says, please review this document that you could maybe send 2 months before its expiration date to make sure that these are current. Having automation that reminds people to do things and then could perhaps help collect that evidence would be a wonderful thing. Vast improvement over the spreadsheet and email system that most companies use.
And that's really what's driving a lot of our thinking at Hyperproof, right? It's to recognize that most organizations are doing this work using Excel spreadsheets or using Dropbox or share file repositories to collect information. But the manual effort around asking people in the organization to do something that I think, Paula, you said at the beginning, is not really part of their day job. It's something that's we're asking them to do in addition to that, is driving a lot of our thinking about automation. Let me shift, if I might, back to you, Paula. I know that one of the initiatives that you've recently launched at Motorola is your hiring for a compliance operations role. How do you see the importance of bringing operations disciplines to these activities that will help make it more efficient, make it more usable for the business?
That is a great question, and we're seeing new ways in which this role will be beneficial. But essentially, we created the role Compliance Operations Manager to essentially create some governance around the way we are using Hyperproof, as well as looking ahead to integrating with some of our other tools that we already have in-house. We've been longtime users of a privacy management tool. There's a lot of information in that tool that might be beneficial to have in Hyperproof. So we'll look into those integrations, and because you guys have kind of open APIs, we're excited that won't be such a tough job. And potentially, most GRC teams within a company, they've had their GRC tool forever that they don't want to give up, which certainly is understandable, and there may be information that we want to leverage there. So looking at creating smart ways to utilize Hyperproof, because the applications we see are sort of endless, and creating that overall governance around the use of the tool is really what, and kind of governance around evidence management generally, is how we see that role initially focused. Again, it's a new discipline for us, so it will evolve over time, but right now it's one person that's been brought on, and we wish we could even bring more, but a lot to do. So.
And I think, Paula, one of the reasons that Hyperproof and Motorola work well together is that you've talked from the beginning about the importance of bringing operations disciplines to this, right? You've talked a lot about how in the past, some of the workflows around compliance have been driven more by the content of the framework or the content of the work and less about actually getting the work done. Can you maybe say a little bit about why that's important to you?
Yeah, I think what goes through my mind when you ask that question is, you know, data protection compliance in particular is one compliance area that literally touches every single department in our company, every single one. So we need to gain consistency on how we manage our evidence, particularly for demonstrating compliance across the board. And, you know, the reason being, you know, again, I think kind of like a lawyer, and as a lawyer, I want to make sure that we are responding to things in a consistent way so that we may not say one thing on one side of the house and it sounds a little different than we said on another side of the house. And so creating that governance for how we, quote unquote, demonstrate our compliance and the due diligence and evidence behind that is so critical to us. So we see the HyperProof tool as being something that will become advantageous for us in the governance we create across the company. I hope that answered your question. Well, that's what came to my mind.
It does. Rebecca, anything you want to add to that?
I think Paula covered it. We need an evidence management system that is going to be efficient, that is going to be streamlined, that is versatile enough to use across products and business units, and that can adapt to different frameworks where we can get information quickly. Because there are some questions that we hope this will answer for us. For instance, if we have 10 products, we would like to be able to say, how close are we to being able to satisfy the questions for a SOC 2 across these 10 products? If HyperProof evidence is managed properly and labeled properly, we should be able to answer that question. Likewise, we might well want to say, you know, we're going into X market. How close are we to being able to do that? What are we going to need to do in terms of data protection and information security? So we can look at those frameworks and say, you know, this is where we see our holes. We're 70% of the way there. We have this work to do. And so this critical evidence management system is going to be a joy for us. I'm so excited about having one because it will answer so many operational questions for us.
And Rebecca, we're early in working with you guys at Motorola, but have you seen or have folks in the business had any reaction to how you're working on evidence management now, different than you were in the past?
They very much appreciate the ability to be able to see what has been collected so far, because one of the big challenges in a large company is that people may have evidence all over the place. It could be in share drives, it could unfortunately be on hard drives, all kinds of places. And when we have a repository for this evidence where people can go to look if they have the appropriate permissions to see where it is and they're not hunting for it, that's hugely helpful. Being able to see what other groups do, again, has given us the ability to integrate and to be more consistent. And that's really important to groups. And for new products that are coming up where they may not have a procedure that's fully mature because they're new, they can go in, take a look at this evidence, see how other groups are managing this issue, and develop appropriate policies and procedures based on what's already here. Again, integrating and spreading some consistency without having to start from ground zero. They're very excited about that and the efficiency that it brings to their workflows.
Maybe for both Paula and Rebecca, I imagine that people who will listen to this, one of the questions they'll have will be, how do you get started? What does it look like in terms of doing something differently? Would you have any advice, either Rebecca or Paula, for our listeners around how do you create a vision for the organization that's compelling to take action around this? How important is it to engage with other stakeholders? What do they need to hear? How do you make that business case internally to make the change?
So I can address that. I would say, baby steps. So one of the things for us is that, and yes, absolutely engaging the other stakeholders, because this isn't just a tool, for example, that my team will use. This is something that a lot of groups within our organization will look at. And so I think the first and most important thing is to understand the pain, if you will, that your particular company is experiencing as it relates to evidence management. For us, a huge initiative at this, it has been our ISO 27000 series, 27001, 17018, 27701. We're pursuing all of that across the whole company, across the whole globe. We are pursuing SOC 2 almost to the same scope. And so while all is going well, that's a large initiative. So there has been a tremendous amount of pain associated with managing that evidence. So we are starting with the tool to implement those programs so we can most effectively manage those programs. We also do assessments to what we call our common controls baseline. So that's kind of stage 2, putting our common controls baseline in there, all the evidence associated, et cetera, et cetera. So really defining your particular company's pain points. I mean, maybe you're struggling with GDPR. You could do that. We're also going to utilize this for building to the NIST privacy framework. That's another initiative. So finding those pain points and starting there, because you can't tackle everything all at once. And then recognizing that the tool doesn't populate itself. You'll have a lot of evidence you need to populate into the tool. And so making sure you have the adequate resource that can help with that aspect. Those would be kind of the two big things I'd recommend.
Rebecca, anything you would want to add to that?
No, I think she about covered it. I think that, start where it hurts the most and start with what you know. So I wouldn't start with a framework that you're completely unfamiliar with. I would start with one that you're already working with, where you've got a system in place. One of the things that we did to validate that this was going to be a reasonable tool for us was to take evidence that we had already collected from a framework and put it into the tool so that we could compare how it functioned in our delightful spreadsheets and email system and how it functions in a tool.
And that's a great point, Rebecca. I'm glad you brought that up. In terms of getting started, right? Sometimes these challenges can seem overwhelming. There's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of controls, there's a lot of stakeholders, there's a lot of evidence. And so the approach that you took around taking what was already done, so the evidence that you already collected, getting that into HyperProof quickly, getting it stood up, and then being able to utilize HyperProof to demonstrate the ability to reuse that evidence across frameworks, to be able to automate the collection of it, be able to automate the tasking around it, starting with something that you have, I think makes a lot of sense. And so then that's certainly an approach that we would recommend around looking at getting an easy start where you can demonstrate value quickly and then have something to build upon. We're going to be coming to our Q&A.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, Paula, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that approach has really resonated with the business folks. Again, sometimes the challenges in compliance is getting the business teams to really understand and appreciate. And when you tell them, we're taking all that evidence that your teams worked so hard to generate, and now we're going to make that evidence work for us and make our job easier when we're looking at other compliance frameworks, they love it. So it's not a hard sell internally.
Good. In terms of advice for some of the folks who are listening to us today, you talked about getting buy-in from various stakeholders in the organization. You've talked about demonstrating just momentarily. You talked about showing them how you're able to reuse some of what they've already done so they don't have to go off and re-execute that work. Have there been any business drivers that you've used to be able to pull in that audience? Have there been any triggers for folks who are on the business side that makes it more interesting for them to lean in on this?
Well, again, I mean, I just keep coming back to our initiatives with regard to the ISO certifications and the SOC 2 reporting. That's something our customers are demanding. So it certainly was not hard to get the attention of our business leaders to be able to say, hey, I know, going through this process has been painful on the teams, and look at how cool it is that now we've got all this evidence that can help us with our compliance to other frameworks. And wow, when you go into Australia or you go here, or you go there, so again, starting with what we knew, the evidence that we had, and showing how we can use that evidence to benefit us elsewhere really made it easy for business leaders to look at it and embrace.
As you look forward, one of the questions we often get asked is, in this domain, what are the areas they get better at? What are the areas where we might look to see some innovation? As you step back and look broadly across the work that you're doing here, are there ideas that you think about? Are there approaches that you'll think that will drive some of that innovation? Where will the greatest value come from?
I certainly think the greatest value is going to come from automation, so that we have standardized activities that can be kicked off in an automated way so that people aren't having to think about what to do next. They're getting a workflow that says, okay, it's the end of the month and we need this. And then a reasonable way to pull that data in and then keep that information in an orderly fashion so that you know that you've got it. So that will be critical. And also, the more mapping we can get done across frameworks and the more automated that mapping can be, that's critical. If we have two frameworks, if we can map to them, and then if there were some kind of automation that would tell us, this is 70% the same, this is 80% the same, or this is 100% the same, they've lifted the language from one framework to another, so that we know whether or not we're comparing apples to oranges or apples to apples. That would be very helpful.
And that's a great point, Rebecca, and a perfect tee up for what I'll say about our functionality on Jumpstart, where we thought about that from the standpoint of customers need to be able to look at the work they've done and get the most value from it. And so if you have stood up controls and gathered evidence around a SOC 2 framework, and now you want to look at doing ISO, then recognizing there's a significant overlap in the requirements across those frameworks, automating that, showing that is something that we think is important, and it allows the traditional conversation that might start with a blank sheet of paper to move to one that starts with, here's what we've already done, how can we reuse that, and even to some extent might foster some conversations around what can we do more quickly. What are the market opportunities that can open up to us because we have done this work, because we've been able to crosswalk it to new frameworks and new requirements. Meeting those new requirements isn't as onerous or as scary as it might otherwise be. So that's a critical part of how we think about what Paula mentioned as common controls, right? The idea that controls can meet multiple requirements across multiple frameworks, and then the evidence that we gather to support that one control ends up doing a whole lot more work. So that's an important part of both the automation and the ability to get efficiency across the platform. Paula, Rebecca, any closing comments you would have for our audience? Anything you want to advise them on or suggest to them?
In particular, other than simply to say, we're personally very excited about the use of this tool. And I would say the one thing I haven't mentioned that for those compliance professionals listening in is, reporting is so important, and we're always having to be able to show senior leadership where we stand with respect to this, that, or the other thing. And one of the things I personally love from that perspective in Hyperproof is the dashboarding. It's really simple and neat and tells a good picture, helps tremendously. So I would say, this meets so many different needs that we needed addressed on so many different levels, and just didn't want to leave that one particular aspect out.
And I guess from my standpoint, there are two things that I try to emphasize to groups when we go out and start to ask them about evidence. The first one is that you need leadership buy-in. It has to come from the top. Otherwise, you do have teams that say, this isn't my day job, and it's going to be very hard to get anything done, automated or not. And so if you've got that buy-in, they understand how this fits into the overall business goals, everybody's going to be on board to do it. The next thing is to convince your teams that compliance is a help and not a problem. Doing these compliance audits will help you to understand what you have in a system and how you actually do business, because oftentimes what we think is our process is not our process. This will help them to identify holes. If they've got leadership buy-in for compliance, they can then use this as a wish list for things that they'd like to do, and use this as a way to demonstrate the things they do really, really well. So there's no downside to compliance auditing for a team. They just need to understand what those advantages are, that it's going to make them more efficient, it's going to help them get the resources they need, it's going to help them showcase the things that they do really well, and it's going to help them map the path forward.
Good. And I think that's a common theme that we've said throughout this, right, is making it as easy as possible for business owners to engage with compliance the right way, and the more that we can add automation to reduce their work, the more that we can add collaboration so that we work together, and the more that we can quickly and efficiently demonstrate the value of the compliance work that's getting done. That's really why we put HyperProof together. That's the impetus for driving the development of the product. Ali, I think we're due to hand back to you for some Q&A.
Thank you, Aiden, and thank you so much to all three of you. That was fantastic. Just as a reminder to our audience, if you would like a copy of the slides just presented, you can download them from the drop-down menu on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Now we'll move on to the Q&A part of our session. We have a few questions in the queue from our audience, and I will read them from the audience in no particular order. And Rebecca, Paula, Aiden, any of you can answer these questions. So here's our first one. Our compliance team manages multiple security audits a year, and it takes a lot of time from business stakeholders, and it interrupts operations. Do you have any thoughts on how to streamline the audit process?
Rebecca, do you want to take that? You are right in that role. Yeah.
So there are several things that are really important with regard to streamlining this. One of them we've touched on repeatedly is using a tool to manage the evidence so that you're not asking the same question over and over again. Because if you are doing multiple security audits in the same year, I will guarantee you are asking many of the same questions, in some cases of the same resources. And if you already have a question, you can go back for the next audit and say, here was the evidence we had, here is the answer we have, can you please validate that this is still true? So you're not just pretending that you've gotten an answer because you had one 6 months ago, but this does help you to validate quickly and move on from there. The other thing that's critically important is that you scope properly when you're doing an audit. Make sure that the scope makes sense and that you don't allow the scope to creep as you're doing your audit. You're asking a particular set of questions about a particular group and their processes. Don't allow it to stray outside that. And in that way, you're going to be able to contain the evidence, make sure that you've asked the right questions and gotten the right answers for them, and that if there are any holes, you have a finite way to fix them instead of letting it spread out in ways that you can't control.
Thanks, Rebecca. We have time for one more question before we wrap up. What do you think are the keys for successfully implementing a new compliance software platform? This person says that they need to onboard a lot of stakeholders.
So,
Paula,
I
you've
suppose
been
I
our
can
greatest
take that.
cheerleader.
Yeah. So, what is the number one thing I felt was important in implementing a new compliance software tool? That was the question, correct? So what did we consider key to HyperProof? One was gaining internal support from teams we knew would benefit from the use. So we've spent a lot of time doing that in advance. The other thing was I did not want to see this tool implemented unless we had our compliance operations manager role agreed to and funded and filled. There's no tool on the planet, I don't care what tool it is, if you don't have someone heads down creating some governance around it, you're not going to get the most bang for the buck out of the tool. So that was absolutely key to us. It was not hard, again, as I said, to show the leadership that there was tremendous value in implementing this. So that's the role was created.
Great. Thank you, Paula. Thank you so much again to all three of you for a very informative session. Again, everyone, our speakers today were Aidan Collins, Paula Pileggi, and Rebecca Strive-Monty. And I'd like to give a special thanks to HyperProof for making this webcast possible. Once again, to obtain your CPE credit for this presentation, please disable your pop-up blockers in order to access the exam. The webcast will close automatically, and the final examination will be presented in a separate window. If you have trouble viewing the CPE test or receiving the CPE certificate, please send us an email at webcast@complianceweek.com. This webcast has been recorded and will be available later today to Compliance Week members on our website under the Webcast tab, which also contains a library of additional CPE webcasts. If you would like to learn more about becoming a member, please contact us at info@complianceweek.com. Some of you may know that Compliance Week has recently lowered our membership pricing from $11.99 to $3.99 in order to build a large community of practitioners. As a full member, you get access to tools and resources, discounts to our conferences, and full access to our website. For today only, we invite you to use code WEBCAST365 to receive a membership for just $1 a day. Check out complianceweek.com/membership to learn more. With that, this concludes our webcast. Thank you again for joining us, and take care.